Glen Campbell, without a doubt, had one of the most illustrious careers of any entertainer ever. He started his career as a studio musician in Los Angeles, playing for the likes of Elvis Presley, the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Merle Haggard, and Bing Crosby, just to name a few. His solo career took off with songs like Gentle on My Mind and By the Time I Get to Phoenix. Glen also hosted the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour on CBS. By the time his career was finished, he had sold 45 million records, had 9 number one songs across the country and pop charts, and had been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. Now in 2008, at the age of 72, Glen released his first music in 15 years with his album Meet Glen Campbell, an album of covers of other artists. Even in his 70s, Glen was still capable of singing and playing with the best of them. But around this time, Glen's wife of 27 years, Kim, started noticing some changes in Glen. First, Glen became very attached to Kim, walking behind her instead of beside her in stores. He even started calling her Mommy. Now, anyone who knew Glen knew that this was very uncharacteristic, as Glen had always been the alpha male, following no one. Glen also started forgetting lyrics to the songs he had been singing for decades. Now, Kim put off worrying as long as she could, but eventually the time came when she had to take Glen to the doctor. In early 2009, doctors determined that Glen was suffering from cognitive impairment and that Alzheimer's could be the cause. Unfortunately, in situations like this, things don't get better, and they didn't for Glen. Over the next year, Glen started asking the same questions constantly, over and over again. He started ranting about the most inconsequential things, and he became even more attached to his wife, Kim. One day, Kim tried an experiment where she walked around their kitchen island 7 times, and then around their pool a dozen more times. Glen followed her step for step. Now, knowing the looming prognosis and the inevitable decline that was coming, Glen and his producer, Julian Raymond, decided they wanted to create one last album, which would be the 61st album of Glen Campbell's career. The album was called Ghost on the Canvas. Most of the songs were written by Glen and Julian. The production of the album began in early 2010. In late 2010, Glen Campbell was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But Glen and Kim already had a tour planned to promote the Ghost on the Canvas album. And while the doctor encouraged Glen to continue his musical pursuits, there was a big difference between recording an album in a controlled environment and traveling from city to city doing live shows. The former could be done in private, the latter could open himself up for ridicule. Certainly, that wouldn't work, would it? Should they even try a tour? Well, of course, said Glen. He wanted to tour. But how should they handle his Alzheimer's? Well, certainly people are going to notice, he said. So, I'll tell everybody I have Alzheimer's. That's how we should handle it. Now, Glen knew something was wrong. He had visited the doctors with Kim and heard the prognosis, and Kim explained it to him as well. But he was just not going to be able to understand the full gravity of the illness. When he was asked who was the first president of the United States, or what season of the year it was, he couldn't remember. But he would just say he had no need to remember that stuff anymore, so he didn't bother to. But while his memory was failing, his musical skills were still up to the task. He could still sing, his tenor voice easily reaching those lofty notes that he was known for in his younger days. And his guitar playing was still spectacular. And forgetting the lyrics, Well, that could be easily remedied with a teleprompter. And there was another reason that Glen wanted to tour. His kids were now part of his band. Ashley played the keyboard and banjo, Shannon played the guitar, Cal played the drums. And each one was able to blend in on the Campbell family harmony the way only family members can. Being able to tour with his kids was something that Glen could not imagine missing out on. So, in June 2011, Kim and Glen told America that Glen Campbell had Alzheimer's. They told the audience that Glen was going to go on tour, in part for the reasons mentioned earlier, and in part because they wanted to inspire and encourage millions of other Americans who were dealing with this dreaded disease. The decision had been made. The tour was set. Now it was time to get to work. It was time for rehearsals. Now the rehearsals could not have gone much worse. One of the effects of Alzheimer's, being easily annoyed about even the smallest things, started affecting Glen, big time. He thought the tempo of the songs was off. He thought the sound was wrong. The band didn't sound right. And the bass, it was always the bass, was too loud. Now this makes sense because as we get older, we lose the ability to hear the higher spectrum of sound, so most of what Glen heard was the bass. He would get frustrated with the musicians, walk over to them, take their instruments, and show them how to play. There were some serious doubts about whether this tour could even start. But then a strange thing happened. They scheduled a live rehearsal, a rehearsal with an audience. It wasn't a big audience, just some close friends and people in the music business. But when Glen saw the audience, something clicked. Glen went back to the Glen Campbell of yesteryear. He sang all the songs in order. He didn't complain about the sound. He interacted with the crowd like he always had. Glen Campbell was, well, Glen Campbell. Now, seeing how the audience seemed to transport Glen back to 30 years earlier, everyone decided it was now or never. The tour would begin. If you are enjoying this story about Glen Campbell and want to have more of them, please consider contributing through Patreon. My goal with Stories of Country Music is to share more about the heroes, history, and heritage of country music. I absolutely love doing this, but I'd like to do even more, and your help through Patreon would be your part in keeping these stories about our music alive and well. You can find a link to my Patreon page below this video. Now back to Glen Campbell. If you want to get an in-depth look at Glen's tour, they made a documentary called I'll Be Me, following Glen throughout the tour. It was very interesting and, of course, somewhat sad. If you are a fan of Glen Campbell, you might find it interesting as well. And if you are dealing with Alzheimer's in your own family, I can see how it would be very helpful. I found the documentary on Amazon Prime. But back to the tour. There were definitely some rough times on the tour. It was tough traveling from city to city and from hotel to hotel. Along the way, Glen needed constant supervision. It wasn't unusual for him to wander away, getting lost in the hotel, or even escaping outside into the city. And the constantly changing environment wreaked havoc on any sort of routine. But when Glen was on stage, things were enormously better. Yes, he occasionally stopped the music or talked too much or couldn't stand still on stage, but for the most part, he was able to put on a stellar show. And the audiences were completely supportive. If things got awkward or Glen got distracted, they would just stand and applaud until he remembered why he was there. And he would find his place and carry on. And along the way, there were some amazing moments on tour. In November 2011, the Country Music Association paid tribute to Glen in their annual awards show. Vince Gill, Keith Urban, and Brad Paisley sang Glen's biggest hits. In 2012, the Grammys awarded Glen the Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, Kim had to help Glen quite a bit in his speech, but he was perfect when he sang Rhinestone Cowboy with the band Perry and Blake Shelton. The tour went on for an incredible 2 years. Glen played 151 shows. Now, for Glen to be able to sing and play the guitar as his mind further deteriorated just proves how much musical talent Glen Campbell was blessed with. Without that abundance of natural talent to begin with, Glen's musical abilities would have slipped much faster. Glen Campbell had truly been blessed. But the fact is, Glen Campbell still had Alzheimer's. And over the months, Glen's decline showed more and more. Toward the last part of the tour, Glen would angrily stop the band and yell at them for messing up. Occasionally, if things didn't go his way, he would intentionally mess the song up himself. Before long, he couldn't recognize the song by the title, especially the newer songs that were on the Ghost from the Canvas album. In November 2012, it became apparent that the tour had to end. Glen Campbell had nothing left to give. Glen's last concert was in Napa, California. Now, after the tour came to an end, you can imagine what Kim's world became. While the tour was going, Glen's decline was certainly noticeable, but there was another city to get to, another show to do. But once the tour ended, Glen and Kim went back home to Malibu, and the reality of Glen's condition hit hard. There were no more distractions, no more traveling, no more hotels, and no more fans. Glen Campbell, who had been singing in front of audiences for more than 60 years, had performed at his last show. Kim said it was like she was living in a loop, answering the same questions and going through the same routine over and over and over again. Glen couldn't watch TV or read books. He couldn't follow the storylines long enough. He was completely bored and would constantly walk through the house, rummaging through drawers and closets. The happiest the great Glen Campbell would get was when he went to the golf course and found stray golf balls. Glen was in the last stages of Alzheimer's. He couldn't remember where the bathroom was, and sometimes he wouldn't even try to find it. He got confused with the light on the floor at night and thought that the dark meant there was no floor there. And Kim's heart sank when, for the first time, Glen couldn't remember who she was. In 2013, Kim asked Glen if he wanted to move to Nashville. He said he absolutely did. Of course, the music scene in Nashville is amazing, and the people loved Glen Campbell. And while Malibu was nice, it just couldn't be home anymore. So toward the end of 2013, the Campbells moved from California to Tennessee. Not long after the move, Kim decided not to take Glen into public any longer. He was getting increasingly agitated and unpredictable, and he was losing the ability to listen and comprehend. And a few months later after that, although Kim hated the idea of it, she started taking Glen to the memory facility for daytime care. Kim just couldn't take care of Glen any longer by herself. The daytime care helped Kim a great deal, but when Glen got back home, he was still stuck at the house during the most difficult hours for an Alzheimer's patient, the evening and nighttime hours. Later in the day, their minds are just completely tired, and they are at their worst. Kim knew it was now time. Glen needed full-time care. He was going to have to live at a memory community. Now, by this point, Glen couldn't carry on a conversation. He could ask questions, but the answers were meaningless. He could play the guitar a little, but most of that ability was now gone too. Glen was 78 years old at this time. Kim held a private birthday party at the Country Music Hall of Fame so close friends could say goodbye. For the next year, Kim and the family still spent most of the day with Glen to keep him from getting lonely. As Alzheimer's continued to set in, Glen grew increasingly violent and started hurting people. As much as the nurses at the community loved Glen, they weren't trained to deal with violent patients, so Glen had to go somewhere else. In 2015, almost 2 years after his tour ended, 79-year-old Glen Campbell was moved into a Vanderbilt University community specializing in Alzheimer's care, one of the premier facilities in all the nation. It is here that Glen would spend his last days. Alzheimer's is a cruel enemy, causing unspeakable pain and torture on the family as they watch their loved one erode day by day. In the latter months of his life, Glen knew he wanted to sing and play the guitar, but he no longer could. He would go up to people and sing gibberish with no melody, and he was reduced to playing the air guitar. All of Glen Campbell's musical abilities had been stripped away. Alzheimer's continued to attack. It took his ability to walk, and then his ability to feed himself, and then his ability to chew. It eventually took away his ability to even breathe, and on August 8, 2017, the great Glen Campbell left this world. He was 81 years old. Now, who knows why death is so cruel and heartless, taking a man like Glen Campbell, strong, handsome, so talented, able to entertain and influence millions of people with his lonesome, wistful voice and amazing guitar playing, and to reduce him to a frail, hollow body without allowing him the dignity of even looking back on his own accomplishments. Who knows? But this we do know. Time waits for no man. And eventually our time will come to an end as well. Perhaps one day we'll walk into the glorious gates of heaven and hear the old familiar sound of Glen Campbell's voice and guitar, greeting us with Wichita linemen as his tenor voice fills the great concert above. Or maybe we'll sit beside him as he plays Rhinestone Cowboy with other country greats that have gone on before us. Who knows how this will end? But that's a story for another day.